My family just sold our company for $850 million. My father popped champagne. My brother ordered a Range Rover before the ink dried. My mother started planning her Tuscan villa retirement. And me? The one who built the algorithm that made us worth nearly $1 billion? I got fired at the dinner table, called the help, and told to leave through the servants' entrance. But here's what they forgot. I didn't just build the system. I own it. And 3 days ago, the patents reverted back to me. They sold a house they don't own. And when I sent them the legal notice, my father's face went from champagne toast to cardiac arrest in under 60 seconds. Buckle up. If you're interested in this topic, hit the like button, subscribe, and type "interested" in the comments. And I will give you a heart. There's a specific kind of silence inside a server room. It's not quiet exactly. It's a hum, a deep, vibrating drone of cooling fans and spinning drives that sinks into your bones and becomes the soundtrack of your existence. For the last 25 years, that hum has been the background music of my life. It was the sound of Logicor Solutions breathing, and I was the one making sure it didn't suffocate. I was on my knees on the anti-static floor tiles, replacing a burnt-out optical switch in rack 4. It was 6 in the evening on a Tuesday. Most of the staff had gone home, except for the cleaning crew and, unfortunately, my brother Conrad. I heard him before I saw him, the heavy thud of Italian loafers on hallway linoleum, followed by the sound of him shouting into his phone like a Wall Street extra who'd watched too many Jordan Belfort videos. I don't care if the market's down, Todd. Just liquidate the position. I need the cash for the down payment. Conrad burst into the server room without swiping his badge. He never carried his badge. He just kicked the door until the magnetic lock gave up or someone opened it for him. He was 40 years old, wearing a suit that cost more than my car, and he still had the frantic energy of a teenager who just crashed his dad's Porsche and is trying to figure out how to blame the valet. "Valerie!" he shouted over the hum of the servers. "Why is the Wi-Fi down in the executive wing? I'm trying to move some assets, and the connection is crawling." I didn't look up. I clicked the new switch into place and watched the status light flicker from amber to a steady, reassuring green. "The Wi-Fi isn't down, Conrad. You're probably throttling the bandwidth again. What are you uploading now?" "Nothing," he snapped, walking over to where I was kneeling. He looked down at me with that familiar mix of pity and annoyance, like I was a plumber he'd called to fix a toilet. To him, I wasn't the chief technology officer. I was just the janitor of the internet. "I'm just trading some crypto files. Look, just fix it. Dad's flying to New York tomorrow, and I need to show him these projections." I stood up, dusting off my jeans. I was 48, with graying hair tied back in a messy bun and a hoodie that said NASA on it. I looked nothing like the rest of my family. My mother, Beatrice, was a former beauty queen who wouldn't be caught dead without pearls. My father, Preston, was a Silver Fox CEO who thought manual labor was a contagious disease. And then there was Conrad, the golden child who'd never worked a real day in his life, but somehow believed his participation trophies qualified him to run an empire. "I'll reroute the traffic from the guest network," I said, walking past him to the main terminal. "But stop trading NFTs on the company's secure line. If you introduce malware again like you did last Christmas, I'm not spending my holiday scrubbing the database clean." Conrad rolled his eyes. "You're such a drama queen, Val. That wasn't malware. It was a beta test. It was a virus that encrypted our payroll system, Conrad. Potato, potato." I fixed his internet in under 90 seconds. He didn't say thank you. He never did. He just checked his phone, saw the bars reappear, and turned to leave. Then he threw over his shoulder, casually like he was asking me to pass the salt. "By the way, Dad wants the quarterly tech audit on his desk by morning. He says the investors need to see the efficiency metrics." I paused mid-keystroke. "Investors? What investors?" Conrad froze for a split second. It was a tiny hesitation, a glitch in his smooth persona the kind of thing most people wouldn't notice. But I'd spent my entire life reading systems. And Conrad was a system with faulty wiring. Just standard capital raising, he said, recovering quickly. You know how it is. Expanding the fleet. Whatever. Just get it done. He walked out, leaving the door propped open. I stared at the empty doorway. Something felt off. Logic or wasn't expanding. We'd been cutting costs for 2 years. We hadn't bought a new truck in 18 months. Why would we need an efficiency audit for investors we supposedly didn't have? I walked over to the shared printer in the corner of the room to grab a diagnostic report I'd run earlier. Buried in the stack of papers was a cover sheet that didn't belong to me. It must have been sent from the executive printer upstairs and rerouted here by mistake, probably another glitch caused by Conrad's bandwidth hogging. I pulled it out. It was a single page, an NDA header. The logo at the top didn't say Logic or Solutions. It said Apex Dynamics. My stomach dropped like I'd just stepped into an empty elevator shaft. Apex Dynamics wasn't an investor. They were a predator. They were the biggest logistics conglomerate in the country. The kind of company that didn't partner with smaller firms. They swallowed them whole, digested the valuable parts, and spit out the bones. I folded the paper carefully and shoved it into my pocket. My hands were shaking just a little. I finished my shift in a daze, my mind racing through possibilities. Were they selling? Were we being acquired? And if so, why the hell hadn't anyone told me? The person who literally built the technology that made this company valuable? I drove home to my small house on the edge of town, far away from the manicured lawns and imported cypress trees of my parents' estate. My house was simple, wood, glass, quiet. No pretension, no performance, just me. I went straight to the backyard. The sun was setting, casting long shadows over the white wooden boxes lined up against the fence. My beehives. I put on my veil and gloves. This was my therapy, my meditation. The bees didn't care about stock prices or Italian suits or family hierarchies. They cared about the colony. They worked until they died for the good of the hive. Every bee had a job. Every bee was essential. And if a bee didn't contribute, it was cast out. Simple. Honest. Fair. I opened the lid of the second hive and watched them work. Thousands of them moving in perfect, efficient unison. At least you guys are loyal, I whispered. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from my mother. Dinner tomorrow night. 7 p.m. sharp. Wear something nice for once. Big news. I looked at the bees, then back at the text. I had a feeling the big news had something to do with the Apex Dynamics logo burning a hole in my pocket. And I had a feeling I wasn't going to like it. The driveway to my parents' estate was lined with imported cypress trees that cost more than my entire college education. As I drove my 10-year-old Subaru up the winding path, I felt that familiar tightening in my chest, the physical response my body had learned after decades of being reminded I didn't quite fit the family aesthetic. This house wasn't a home. It was a museum of my parents' ego. I parked around back, near the servants' entrance, out of habit. The front circle was occupied by Dad's vintage Jaguar and Conrad's brand-new Range Rover. Apparently the deal had already gone through. I walked into the dining room at exactly 7. The table was set with the good china, the Royal Doulton set that only came out for weddings, funerals, and apparently corporate betrayals. Crystal glasses sparkled under the chandelier like tiny landmines. My mother, Beatrice, was arranging a centerpiece of white lilies. She looked up as I entered, her eyes scanning me from head to toe with the efficiency of a TSA agent. Well, she said, her smile tight, at least you brushed your hair, Valerie. Is that a new blouse? I've had it for 5 years, Mom. I took my usual seat at the far end of the table, as far from the head as physically possible while still technically being present. Good to see you too. Don't be snippy, she said, waving a hand like she was swatting a mosquito. Tonight is a celebration. Pour yourself some wine. It's a 2005 Bordeaux. My father, Preston, walked in from his study looking flushed and victorious. He was 74, but tonight he looked 10 years younger. The weight of the failing business seemed to have lifted off his shoulders like a miracle cure. Conrad followed behind him, grinning like a shark that had just smelled blood in the water. "Valerie," Preston boomed. "Glad you could make it. We didn't want to start without the whole family." That was a lie. They'd started without me thousands of times. But I nodded and took a sip of the wine. It was excellent. It tasted like money. "So," I said, deciding to rip the bandage off, "what's the occasion?" Did Conrad finally learn how to tie his own shoes? Conrad's grin faltered. "Haha. Very funny, Val." "No, better," Preston said, standing at the head of the table. He tapped his fork against his glass, and the sound rang out sharp and clear, a call to attention, a summoning of focus. "We have done it," Preston announced, his voice trembling with emotion like he was accepting an Oscar. "For 40 years, your mother and I have built Logicor from a single truck into a regional empire. We've weathered recessions, strikes, fuel shortages. But tonight we have secured our legacy." He paused for dramatic effect, milking the moment. "As of this afternoon, we have signed a definitive agreement to sell Logicor solutions to Apex Dynamics." I gripped the stem of my wine glass, so hard I thought it might snap. I knew it was coming, but hearing it out loud was different. It felt like a physical blow, like someone had just punched me in the solar plexus and then asked me to smile for a photo. "Apex?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. "Dad, they're asset strippers. They'll fire half the staff. They'll dismantle the fleet. They'll get everything They're paying us $850 million, Preston said, enunciating every syllable like he was teaching a child to count. 850 million. The room went silent. The number hung in the air, heavy and intoxicating, a narcotic that seemed to make everyone's eyes glaze over slightly. "Cash and stock deal," Conrad piped up, unable to help himself. "We close in 30 days. Do you know what this means, Val? We're royalty. We're actual royalty." Beatrice reached out and squeezed Preston's hand, her eyes glistening with tears of joy. "We can finally retire, darling. We can get that villa in Tuscany. We deserve this." I looked at them, all three of them, and for a moment I waited. I waited for them to acknowledge the obvious, to turn to me and say, "And of course, Valerie, you'll get your share. This wouldn't have happened without you." But they didn't. They just kept smiling at each other like I wasn't even in the room. "That's a lot of money," I said slowly, carefully. "So what's the transition plan?" "The tech stack is completely custom. Apex uses a different architecture. They're going to need me to migrate the dynamic route optimization system. That takes 6 months minimum, and that's if we work around the clock." Preston cleared his throat. He exchanged a quick glance with Conrad, the kind of look that told me they'd rehearsed this part. "Actually, Valerie," Preston said, pouring himself more wine, "that's part of the news. Apex has their own engineering team," Conrad added, leaning back in his chair like he was about to deliver a punchline. "They're huge. They have hundreds of devs in Silicon Valley. They don't need our legacy IT department." Legacy. The word hit me like a slap. "I wrote that code, Conrad. It's the only reason our trucks are 20% more efficient than the competition. It's not legacy. It's the core of the business." "It's part of the asset sale," Preston said dismissively, like we were discussing office furniture. "It's included in the price. The point is, Valerie, you don't need to worry about the migration. You don't need to worry about anything." I set my glass down very carefully. "So what's my share?" The silence that followed was different. It wasn't heavy, it was sharp, dangerous, like the air before lightning strikes. "Now, before we go any further, I need you to understand something. I wasn't asking out of greed. I was asking because I had equity. Legal, documented equity. In 2011, When this company was circling the drain and bankruptcy lawyers were sharpening their knives, I saved them. I liquidated my savings, sold my condo, and gave them $200,000 in cash to make payroll. And in exchange, I got 15% of the company in stock options. It was in writing. It was legal. It was mine. So when I asked what my share was, I wasn't begging for a handout. I was asking for what I was owed. But the look on their faces told me everything I needed to know. Stay with me, because what they said next didn't just break my heart, it detonated my entire sense of reality. And their justification? It's the kind of thing that'll make your blood boil. Your share. Beatrice repeated, her voice dropping an octave like I'd just asked her to explain quantum physics. What do you mean, your share? I own 15% of the company's stock options, I said, my voice steady despite the fact that my heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. From the restructuring in 2011, when I saved us from bankruptcy. Remember? Preston chuckled. It was a dry, brittle sound, like autumn leaves being crushed underfoot. Oh, Valerie, those were performance options. They expired years ago. We rolled them back into the general fund to cover overhead. The words took a moment to register. When they did, it felt like the floor had opened up beneath me. You what? I stood up so fast my chair scraped against the hardwood floor. You can't just roll them back. That was my equity. That was my retirement. Sit down, Valerie. Preston's voice shifted instantly. The jovial father vanished, replaced by the CEO who'd spent 40 years intimidating people into submission. Stop making this about you. This is a family victory. This is about legacy. So I get nothing. My voice was rising now, breaking through years of trained politeness. 25 years. I built the system that made this company worth $850 million, and I get nothing. You got a salary, Beatrice snapped, setting down her wine glass with a sharp click. We paid for your college. We gave you a job when nobody else would hire a college dropout who liked playing with bugs more than people. You have been well compensated, Valerie. The casual cruelty of it hit me like a physical blow. College dropout. I'd left school for one semester to help them during the crisis, and I'd gone back and finished. But in their narrative, I was the charity case, the family burden they'd graciously employed out of pity. I looked at Conrad. He was smirking, looking down at his plate, trying to hide his smile but failing. He was enjoying this. He was actually enjoying watching me realize I'd been erased from my own story. This is unbelievable, I whispered. It's business, Preston said, cutting into his steak with surgical precision. Now sit down and eat. It's Wagyu. Do you have any idea what this costs per pound? I didn't sit down. I couldn't feel my legs. The betrayal wasn't just about the money, though $850 million divided by 4 family members would have been life-changing. It was about the erasure. They were erasing 25 years of my life with a signature on a contract I'd never seen. Where is the money going? I asked. I needed to know. I needed to hear them say it out loud. $850 million. If it's not going to the employees and it's not going to me, where is it going? It's going into the family trust, Preston said, not even looking up from his plate, to secure the lineage. The lineage, I repeated slowly. You mean Conrad? Conrad has vision, Beatrice said defensively, like she was protecting a child instead of a 40-year-old man. He wants to start a venture capital firm. He has big ideas, Valerie. He's going to turn that money into billions. I actually laughed. It came out harsh and bitter. Conrad lost $200,000 on digital monkey pictures last month. He can't run a lemonade stand, let alone a venture capital firm. That's enough. Preston slammed his hand on the table. The crystal glasses rattled. The sound echoed through the dining room like a gunshot. I will not have you insult your brother in this house. He is the future of this family. You are, he paused, searching for the words. And when he found them, they cut deeper than any blade. You're the help, Valerie. You always have been. You're a mechanic. A very good mechanic, I'll give you that. But just a mechanic. The words hung in the air, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. The help. That's what I was to them. Not a daughter. Not a partner. Not the person who'd sacrificed everything to keep their dream alive. Just the help. I looked at Mr. Henderson, the family lawyer who'd been sitting quietly at the far end of the table this entire time. He was 70 years old and had been with us for 3 decades. Right now he looked pale, sick even. He was staring at his napkin like it contained the secrets of the universe. Mr. Henderson, I said, turning to face him directly, you drafted the paperwork for the sale. Is this true? Did they strip my equity? Mr. Henderson looked up. His eyes darted between Preston and me, and I could see the moral calculation happening in real time. The choice between legal ethics and the man who'd paid his retainer for 30 years. He cleared his throat nervously. Valerie, the corporate structure is very complex. Technically, the board has the right to dilute shares if— Shut up, Henderson, Preston growled. She doesn't need a legal lecture. She needs to learn her place. Preston stood up and walked toward me. He was a tall man, 6'3", and he'd spent his entire life using his height to intimidate people. Usually it worked. He stopped inches from my face. We are giving the proceeds to Conrad, he said, his voice low and controlled, because he is the one who will carry the name forward. You live in that shack with your insects. You have no ambition. You're 48 years old, and you have nothing to show for it. No husband, no children, no legacy. You are a dead end, Valerie. I have the code, I said quietly. I have the system that runs your empire. Not anymore. Preston smiled. It was cruel. The smile of a man who thinks he's won. As of tomorrow morning, Apex owns everything. The trucks, the buildings, the servers, the code. All of it. And since you seem so unhappy with this arrangement, he paused, savoring the moment like fine wine. You're fired. My breath hitched. What? You heard me. You're fired. For insubordination. For cause, which means no severance package. He gestured toward the door like he was shooing away a stray dog. Get out of my house. Go pack your desk. Actually, don't bother. Security will mail you a box. Just give me your badge. I stared at him. Then I looked at my mother. She was sipping her wine, refusing to meet my eyes. The same woman who'd taught me to tie my shoes, who'd braided my hair before school, who'd once told me I could be anything I wanted. Now she was looking away, choosing her villa in Tuscany over her daughter. I looked at Conrad. He was beaming. Finally, he was the winner. The chosen one. The heir. Everything he'd always believed he deserved had just fallen into his lap, and he hadn't had to work a single day for it. You're making a mistake, I said. My voice was surprisingly calm. The shock had passed, replaced by something cold and hard and crystalline. Clarity. The only mistake I made, Preston sneered, was keeping you on the payroll this long. Now get out. Mr. Henderson stood up halfway, his face conflicted. Preston, wait. We should discuss the optics of this. The staff. Sit down, Henderson. Preston roared. The old man sat. I reached into my pocket. I pulled out my key card, the master key that opened every door in Logicor, every server room, every executive office. I'd carried it for 25 years. It was warm from my body heat. I dropped it into Preston's half-eaten mashed potatoes. It landed with a wet plop. Goodbye, Dad, I said. Then I turned and walked out. I didn't slam the door. I didn't cry. I didn't scream or beg or make a scene. I just walked past the servants' entrance, past the expensive cars, and got into my Subaru. As I drove down that long driveway, leaving the estate behind, my hands were steady on the wheel. My breathing was even. My father thought he held all the cards. He thought he owned the company, the code, and me. But as I turned onto the highway, heading back to my quiet house and my loyal bees, I remembered something. I remembered a rainy afternoon in 2011. I remembered a desperate man begging his 33-year-old daughter to save his company. I remembered him promising me anything, if I'd just help him survive. And I remembered a document I'd insisted on, a document drafted by a different lawyer, one I'd hired myself because even then, some part of me knew not to trust my family with my future, a document that was currently sitting in the fireproof safe in my study. Section 17C. Reversion rights. They had forgotten about it, but I hadn't. My house felt different when I got back. Usually it felt a little empty, a little too quiet for one person. But tonight it felt like a fortress. I locked the front door, turned off the porch light, and walked straight to my study. The study was my real sanctuary. One wall was covered in framed blueprints of early combustion engines, beautiful mechanical puzzles that made sense in ways people never did. The other wall was lined with books on coding languages that hadn't been used since the 90s, back when programming was an art form instead of a corporate assembly line. In the corner, behind a heavy oak desk, was a floor safe. I spun the dial with practiced precision. Left to 32, right to 14, left to 5. The heavy steel door clicked open. Inside, underneath my birth certificate and the deed to the house, was a manila envelope. It was dusty. I hadn't touched it in almost a decade. I pulled it out and sat on the floor, my legs crossed like a kid about to open a birthday present. I carefully undid the string tie and slid the document out. Emergency Restructuring and Intellectual Property Assignment Agreement, dated April 12, 2011. I ran my fingers over the paper. It was thick, expensive stock, the kind lawyers use when they want you to know the document is serious. I remembered that day vividly. It was raining. The old office roof was leaking into buckets in the hallway. Preston was in his office, actually crying, the only time I'd ever seen my father cry. The bank was threatening to foreclose on the fleet. We'd missed payroll twice. The drivers were threatening to strike. The whole thing was a house of cards collapsing in slow motion. I was 33 years old. I'd just sold my condo, my first real asset, my first piece of independence. I'd liquidated my savings, my retirement account, everything. I had $200,000 in cash. It was everything I owned in the world. Dad begged me for it. He said it was a loan, but I knew better. Loans to family never came back. They disappeared into a black hole of gratitude and resentment. So I made him a deal. I would give him the cash to make payroll and keep the doors open. And I would build him a new system, an automated dispatch algorithm that would cut fuel costs by 30% and make us competitive again. But in exchange, I wanted protection. I wanted it in writing. I flipped to page 12, section 17C, reversion rights. The clause was short and brutally simple. In the event that Logic or Solutions does not exercise the option to purchase the exclusive rights to the dynamic route optimization, DURO, patents in perpetuity for the sum of $10 million within 15 years of this signing, all rights, ownership, and royalty streams shall revert automatically to the original author, Valerie Vance. I looked at the signature at the bottom. Preston's signature was shaky, desperate, the handwriting of a drowning man grabbing for a life raft. He'd laughed when he signed it. $10 million, he'd said, wiping his eyes. Valerie, if this company is ever worth enough to pay you $10 million for some computer code, I'll be the happiest man alive. Sure, put it in. It's monopoly money. 15 years. I pulled out my phone and opened the calculator. April 12th, 2011, plus 15 years. The deadline was April 12th, 2026. Today was April 24th, 2026. They had missed the deadline by 12 days. They were so busy popping champagne for the Apex sale, so busy measuring drapes for their Tuscan villa, so busy planning Conrad's venture capital empire, that they'd forgotten to check the expiration date on the foundation of their house. My heart started to pound, not from fear, but from adrenaline. Pure, crystalline adrenaline. I wasn't just an employee they'd fired. I wasn't just the help they'd dismissed. I was the landlord, and their lease had just expired. Okay, pause. Stop. Breathe for a second, because what I'm about to tell you next is going to sound like a revenge fantasy. It's going to sound too good to be true. But here's the thing. Sometimes the universe doesn't punish bad people. Sometimes bad people punish themselves by being so arrogant, so convinced of their own superiority, that they don't read the fine print. And that fine print, that's about to burn their entire world to the ground. Drop a comment if you've ever had someone underestimate you, because what happens next isn't just revenge. It's justice, and it's about to get nuclear. I didn't call a lawyer. Not yet. I knew exactly what I needed to do, and I needed to do it while the adrenaline was still pumping through my veins like rocket fuel. I opened my laptop and logged into the United States Patent and Trademark Office portal. I'd kept my creator account active all these years, updating the maintenance fees out of my own pocket, just in case. Call it paranoia. Call it preparation. Call it the one smart thing I did when everyone around me was treating me like I was invisible. I navigated to the Transfer of Ownership tab. My fingers were steady now, steadier than they'd been in years. I uploaded the scanned copy of the 2011 agreement. I highlighted section 17C in bright yellow digital marker. I filled out the assertion of reversion form. The website asked me a series of yes or no questions. Are you the original author of the patents in question? I clicked yes. Has the exclusivity purchase period expired without exercise? I clicked yes. Do you assert full ownership rights as of this date? I clicked yes. Then I hovered my cursor over the submit button. For just a moment, I hesitated. This wasn't just paperwork. This was war. This was me choosing to detonate a bomb that would destroy my family's legacy, their retirement, their entire future. But then I remembered Preston's words. You're the help. You always have been. I remembered Beatrice looking away while they fired me. I remembered Conrad's smirk. I clicked submit. A little spinning wheel appeared on the screen. That maddening circle that makes you think your computer has frozen. It spun for 5 seconds. 5 seconds that changed my entire life. Then, submission received. Processing. Estimated confirmation. 48 to 72 hours. I closed the laptop. I stood up. I walked to the kitchen and made myself a cup of tea, chamomile, because I needed to calm the electric storm raging through my nervous system. My hands were perfectly steady as I poured the hot water. No shaking, no doubt, no regret. Dad wanted to give everything to Conrad. He wanted to secure the lineage, pass the crown to the golden child who'd never worked a day in his life. Well, he was about to learn a very hard lesson about genetics and inheritance. Conrad might have Dad's eyes and his swagger, but I had something better. I had his ruthlessness, his strategic mind, his ability to see 3 moves ahead. And unlike them, I actually read the fine print. The next 3 days were the strangest of my life. I was unemployed for the first time in 25 years. I woke up at 6 in the morning out of habit, but instead of rushing to the server room to put out fires and fix Conrad's latest digital disaster, I made coffee. I sat on my back porch. I watched the bees. They were busy. The spring nectar flow was starting, and they were bringing in pollen like tiny, fuzzy freight trucks. Bright yellow from the dandelions. Deep orange from the poppies. They were building. They were thriving. They didn't need a CEO or a board of directors or a trust fund. They just worked. My phone was eerily quiet. Logicor had cut my access to the company email servers at 8:01 a.m. the morning after the dinner. Apparently, they'd had IT standing by to execute the termination the second the clock struck. Fired employee. They'd also remote wiped my company phone, but I'd expected that. I'd been using my personal burner for anything important for years. I spent those 3 days working on a project I'd been neglecting, restoring a vintage Patek Philippe pocket watch from the 1920s. It was a complex mechanism all tiny gears and springs and levers working in perfect harmony. If even one gear was misaligned by a fraction of a millimeter, the whole thing stopped. The watch was a lot like Logicor, actually, a complex machine where every piece mattered. And they just fired the one person who knew how to wind it. On the morning of the third day, my personal email pinged. Sender, usbeta.gov. Subject, notification of patent reversion, recordation complete. My hand trembled slightly as I clicked it open. Attached was a formal certificate with an official seal and everything, the kind of document that holds up in federal court. This document certifies that all rights, title, and interest in U.S. patent numbers 8,442,001, dynamic route optimization, 8,442,002, predictive fuel logic, and 8,442,013, autonomous dispatch queuing, have been reverted to the original inventor, Valerie Vance, effective April 12, 2026. I owned it. I owned the brain of the company, the algorithm that made every truck move efficiently, the code that had turned Logicor from a failing regional carrier into an $850 million acquisition target. It was mine, all mine. I printed 3 copies of the certificate on heavy stock paper. Then I drafted a letter. I didn't use legal jargon or threatening language. I kept it simple, factual, devastating. To the board of directors of Logicor Solutions and the acquisitions department of Apex Dynamics. As of this date, I assert my exclusive ownership of the underlying technology currently powering the Logicor logistical fleet. The license granted in 2011 has expired as of April 12, 2026. Any continued use of this technology constitutes willful infringement of intellectual property under U.S. Code Title 35. You have 24 hours to cease operations of all software utilizing my patents, or to contact me to negotiate a new licensing agreement. Regards, Valerie Vance, patent holder. I put the letters in FedEx envelopes. I marked them priority overnight. Signature required. I drove to the shipping center, feeling like I was mailing a pipe bomb, which, in a legal sense, I basically was. The girl behind the counter weighed the envelopes and popped her gum. Important stuff? She asked. I smiled. You could say that. It's an eviction notice. She laughed, thinking I was joking. I wasn't. I drove home and waited. I knew exactly how the timeline would work because I'd watched this company operate for 25 years. The letters would arrive around 10 a.m. It would take about 30 minutes for the mailroom to sort them and route them up to executive. Another 30 minutes for someone to actually open them and realize they weren't junk mail. And then, around noon, the screaming would start. I went back to my pocket watch. I carefully placed the final piece, the escapement wheel, the tiny gear that regulates the entire mechanism. I wound the mainspring slowly, feeling the resistance build. Then I let it go. Tick, tick, tick. The watch came alive in my hands, keeping perfect time after 100 years of silence. It was beautiful. At 11:42 a.m., my phone buzzed. Incoming call, Dad. I let it ring. Incoming call, Dad. I let it ring again. Incoming call, Mom. I put the phone on Do Not Disturb and set it face down on the table. But I could still feel it, the constant vibration against the wood, like an angry hornet trapped in a jar. I poured another cup of tea and watched the bees. By 1 p.m., my phone had 47 missed calls, 20 from Preston, 12 from Beatrice, 10 from Conrad, and 5 from a number I didn't recognize. Probably the poor general counsel at Logicor who was currently having a stress-induced heart attack in his corner office. I decided to listen to the voicemails, just to gauge the temperature of the fire I'd started. I played the first one from Preston, time-stamped 11:58 a.m. Valerie, what the hell is this? I just got a letter from the patent office. Is this some kind of sick joke? Call me back immediately. You are embarrassing this family. He sounded confused, angry but confused. He still thought he was in charge. He still thought this was something he could fix with a phone call and a lecture. I skipped ahead to his third message, recorded 20 minutes later. Valerie, pick up the goddamn phone. Apex just called us. Their legal team is freaking out. They're threatening to pause the deal pending an IP audit. You need to sign a waiver saying this is a mistake. Right now. Do you hear me? I will sue you into the ground if you don't fix this. Panic. Beautiful, crystalline panic. I played one from Conrad. Hey Val. Look, Dad's losing it. Just come on. Stop playing games. We can give you something, okay? Maybe 50 grand. Just sign the paperwork. I have investors lined up for my fund. I can't look like an idiot right now. Call me. 50 grand. He was trying to buy a diamond with a grocery store coupon. The last voicemail was from Mom. Her voice was trembling, but it was that dangerous, icy tremble she used to use when I was a child and hadn't cleaned my room properly. I don't know who you think you are, doing this to your father. He has high blood pressure, Valerie. If he has a stroke, it's on your hands. You are being selfish and vindictive. This is not how we raised you. Fix this. I deleted all the messages. Every single one. Then I blocked their numbers again. I wasn't going to face them alone. I knew my family, they wouldn't play fair. They would bully, manipulate, gaslight, and lie. They'd use every psychological weapon they'd sharpened over decades of treating me like the help. I needed a shark. I needed someone who wouldn't flinch. I called Victor Galliano. I'd met him a few years ago at a tech conference in San Francisco. He was a corporate IP litigator who wore bespoke Italian suits and smiled like a crocodile sizing up prey. He'd given me his card and said, "If you ever decide to stop letting that company exploit you, call me. I like cases I can win." He picked up on the second ring. "Valerie Vance." His voice was smooth, deep, amused. "I was wondering when I'd hear from you. I saw the USPTO filing this morning. It popped up on my patent tracker. A very aggressive move." "Hello, Victor," I said. "I need representation. I assume Logicor is currently melting down like Chernobyl." "Pretty much." "Excellent." Galliano actually chuckled. "I love a good three-way dogfight. What's your goal here, Valerie? Do you want a settlement? A reinstatement? An apology? What are we going for?" I looked out my window at the beehives. I thought about the dinner. I thought about Preston throwing my keycard into mashed potatoes. I thought about being called the help in front of the family lawyer. "No settlement," I said. "I want full market value. I want them to realize they sold a house they didn't own. I want to squeeze them, Victor. I want to squeeze them until the pips squeak." "Music to my ears," Galliano said. I could hear the grin in his voice. "I'll draft a formal cease and desist. I'll demand an immediate injunction on their fleet operations. Every truck using your algorithm is a rolling crime scene. I'll have it sent within the hour. And Valerie?" "Yes." "Don't answer your phone. Don't talk to them. Don't open your door. Let me be the wall between you and the chaos. Can you do that?" "Consider it done," I said. I hung up. The house was quiet again, but the energy had changed completely. The fuse was lit. The bomb had gone off somewhere across town. Now all I had to do was sit back and watch the smoke rise. I walked to the kitchen and made myself a sandwich: turkey, Swiss cheese, tomato, mustard. Simple. Honest. I took a bite, and for the first time in 3 days, food actually tasted good. The siege began at 8 a.m. the next morning. It didn't start with a lawsuit or a legal document. It started with banging on my front door. Loud, desperate, violent banging that made the windows rattle. I was in my kitchen, feeding my sourdough starter when I heard it. I checked the security monitor mounted on the wall above the microwave. It was Conrad. He was wearing the same suit from 2 days ago, but now it was rumpled and stained. His hair was sticking up at odd angles. He looked like he hadn't slept in 48 hours. He looked like a man who'd just realized his inheritance had evaporated. He pounded on the door again, using both fists. "Valerie, I know you're in there. Open this damn door." I didn't move. I took a slow sip of my coffee and pressed the intercom button mounted next to the door. "Go away, Conrad," I said calmly. My voice echoed through the outdoor speaker like the voice of God. "I have nothing to say to you." Conrad glared directly at the camera lens, his face distorted by the fisheye effect. "You can't do this, Val. Do you have any idea what you've done? Apex has frozen the funds. The deal is stuck in escrow. They're asking questions we can't answer." "That sounds like a you problem," I replied, my voice still perfectly calm. "You should have checked the IP ownership before you tried to sell it. Dad is willing to be generous." Conrad shouted, changing tactics. He pulled a checkbook out of his jacket pocket and held it up to the camera. "He authorized me to write you a check right now. $200,000. Tax-free. Just sign the waiver, hand over the rights to the code, and we forget this ever happened." I actually laughed. I couldn't help it. $200,000, Conrad? The valuation of those patents is roughly 40% of the total deal value. That's $340 million. And you're offering me 0.05%. "It's better than nothing," he screamed, his face turning red. "You're just a greedy spinster. You don't even have kids. What do you need money for? I have a legacy to build. Get off my porch, Conrad." "No, I'm not leaving until you sign." He looked around wildly, spotted one of my ceramic planters, one of my favorites, actually, handmade by a local artist, and picked it up. Then he smashed it against the siding of my house. Dirt and pottery shards exploded everywhere. I didn't flinch. I just picked up my phone and dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency?" "I have an intruder attempting to break into my home," I said, my voice steady and clear. "He's violent and currently destroying property. My address is 42 Oak Lane. Is the intruder known to you?" "Yes, it's my brother, but he's not welcome here and he's not leaving." I watched on the monitor as Conrad paced back and forth like a caged animal, screaming obscenities about my bees, my sad little life, and how I was jealous of his success. 5 minutes later, a police cruiser pulled into my driveway, lights flashing. 2 officers stepped out. Conrad immediately tried to pull the "Do you know who my father is" card. It didn't work. When he resisted the officer trying to calm him down, actually shoved the guy, they handcuffed him. I watched through the camera as they put him in the back of the cruiser, his expensive suit jacket twisted awkwardly, his face pressed against the window. It was humiliating. It was pathetic. And some small, vindictive part of me felt absolutely nothing. This was the same man who'd called me a drama queen for 25 years, who'd infected our servers with malware and blamed me for not fixing it fast enough, who'd smirked while Dad fired me. Now he was being hauled away like a common drunk. After the police left, I went outside to sweep up the broken pottery. My phone buzzed with a text from Victor Galliano. "Your father just filed an emergency complaint. They're suing you for corporate sabotage and theft of trade secrets. Emergency hearing scheduled for tomorrow, 10 a.m. Wear a suit. It's showtime. Real quick, before we go into that courtroom, I need to ask you something. Have you ever had a family member try to gaslight you into thinking you're the problem when they're the ones who screwed you over? Type gaslight in the comments if you've lived this, because what happens in that conference room tomorrow isn't just a legal battle. It's a masterclass in how narcissists rewrite history when they're losing. And trust me, they're about to lose badly. The conference room at the downtown law firm was cold and smelled of lemon polish and fear. On one side of the long mahogany table sat my parents, Preston looking like he'd aged 10 years in 3 days, his skin gray, his eyes bloodshot and hollow. Beatrice sat next to him, clutching her pearls like a talisman, like if she held them tight enough she could wish away reality. They'd brought a team of 4 lawyers from a white shoe firm, the kind of legal firepower that costs $1,000 an hour per attorney. On the other side of the table sat me and Victor Galliano, just the 2 of us. Victor was perfectly relaxed, leaning back in his chair like he was at a coffee shop, tapping a silver pen against his legal pad. The contrast was deliberate. They'd brought an army. We'd brought precision. "Let's cut to the chase," Preston's lead attorney, a man named Sterling with slicked-back hair and a face like a hatchet, barked across the table. "Your client, Ms. Vance, has illegally accessed Logicor servers post-termination. She has locked down the dynamic route optimization system, effectively holding the company hostage. This is corporate sabotage. This is, frankly, cyberterrorism." "Strong words," Victor smiled, not looking up from his notepad. "Do you have proof of this alleged access?" Sterling slid a thick stack of papers across the table with theatrical flair. "Server logs, showing Ms. Vance's admin credentials accessing the core kernel at 8 p.m. on Tuesday, 12 hours after she was terminated." I looked at the logs. My heart skipped a beat for just a second. I hadn't accessed the system. Had I? Then I looked closer at the timestamps and felt a smile tug at the corner of my mouth. "These are UTC timestamps," I said, speaking for the first time. My voice was calm, factual. Sterling sneered. So, I continued, pointing at the page. Logicor servers are based on Eastern Standard Time. 8 p.m. Universal Time Coordinated is 4 p.m. Eastern. I was still employed at 4 p.m. on Tuesday. I was in the server room, fixing a switch that Conrad broke while trading digital monkey pictures on the company network. I slid the papers back across the table. "I didn't hack your system. I just stopped maintaining it. And without me, it breaks. That's not sabotage. That's just gravity. You built a kill switch." Preston shouted, slamming his hand on the table. "You rigged it to fail." "Mr. Vance," Victor interjected smoothly, his voice like silk over steel, "please control yourself. My client didn't build a kill switch. She built a highly complex proprietary engine that requires a specific cryptographic key to run. That key is her intellectual property. When you fired her, you threw away the key. Your problem isn't that she sabotaged you. Your problem is that you fired the only person who knew how to keep the lights on." "It's work for hire," Sterling argued, his voice rising slightly. "She was an employee. Everything she created belongs to the company." "Not according to the 2011 agreement," Victor said, pulling out the document like a magician producing a rabbit. He slid it across the table. "Section 17C. The IP reverted automatically on April 12, 2026. It is now legally her private property. And every single one of your 500 trucks currently on the road is using her property without a license. That's not sabotage, Mr. Sterling. That's theft. My client isn't the thief here. You are." Preston looked like he was about to have a stroke. His face was bright red, and a vein in his temple was visibly throbbing. "We paid for her college. We gave her a job. We raised her." "Irrelevant," Victor said flatly. "The law doesn't care about your parenting expenses or your feelings of entitlement. It cares about contracts. And you signed this one, with your own hand, witnessed and notarized." Beatrice spoke up for the first time, her voice trembling with perfectly performed anguish. "Valerie, please, don't do this. Apex is going to walk away. You're destroying everything we built, everything your father worked for." "You destroyed it," I said, looking her directly in the eye. "When you decided I was just the help. When you decided to give my life's work to Conrad. When you went on television and called me a monster." "We can offer a settlement," Sterling said quickly, sensing his clients were losing ground. $5 million. One-time payment. Clean break." Victor laughed. It was a loud, genuine laugh that echoed in the cold room. $5 million for the engine of an $850 million deal? Try again. Or don't. We're perfectly happy to let Apex do their own due diligence and discover they're about to purchase stolen goods. "You wouldn't dare," Preston hissed, leaning forward. You signed an NDA. You're legally prohibited from. The NDA covers trade secrets, I interrupted. It doesn't cover me proving ownership of my own property to a potential buyer who's about to get scammed. I'm meeting with the Apex technical audit team tomorrow afternoon. I suggest you tell them the truth before I do. I stood up. Victor stood with me, smoothing his suit jacket. As we walked toward the door, I heard Preston throw something, a glass, maybe a paperweight, against the wall. It shattered with a sound like breaking bones. The meeting with Apex Dynamics took place the next day in a neutral location, a hotel conference suite near the airport. Corporate Switzerland. The Apex team was serious, professional, and deeply unimpressed with the circus they'd walked into. 3 engineers with tablets and suspicious eyes. 2 lawyers who looked like they ate fraudsters for breakfast. And their CTO, a woman named Dr. Aria Thorne. I'd read her papers on algorithmic logistics. She had a PhD from MIT and had revolutionized supply chain optimization for Amazon. She was brilliant, ruthless, and she absolutely was not going to be fooled by corporate bluster or family drama. Preston and Conrad were there too, sitting in the corner like scolded children. Sterling had advised them not to speak unless directly addressed. They looked miserable. Ms. Vance, Dr. Thorne said, shaking my hand with a firm grip. We've reviewed your patent filing. It appears legitimate. However, Logicor claims that their current system has evolved significantly beyond your original 2011 patents. They claim it's a derivative work that they own independent of your contributions. That's their claim, I nodded. But I can prove the foundation is identical. The house has been repainted, but the bones are mine. How? Dr. Thorne asked, crossing her arms. I opened my laptop. I need access to the live code repository. Read-only is fine. Preston started to protest. Absolutely not, this is. But one of the Apex lawyers silenced him with a single look. The kind of look that said, you are currently trying to sell us a company that might not exist. Sit down and shut up. They granted me access. I connected to the Logicor server and projected the code onto the big screen. A massive wall of text, millions of lines of C++ and Python scrolling past like the Matrix. When I wrote the core kernel in 2011, I explained typing commands as I spoke. I used a very specific variable naming convention to track the logic threads. I'm an amateur apiologist, a beekeeper, so I named everything after bees. I typed a search command into the terminal. grep apis mellifera. The screen lit up like a Christmas tree. Hundreds of results scrolled past, highlighting variables throughout the entire code base. Apis mellifera, I said, pointing at the screen. The European honeybee. That's the main routing thread, the queen, if you will. It coordinates all the other processes. I typed another command, grep bombus_bombus. More results flooded the screen. Bombus. The bumblebee. That's the load balancing algorithm, the workers that distribute the cargo across the fleet. I turned to face Dr. Thorne directly. If this system had truly been rewritten or evolved beyond my original work, these core variable names would have been refactored. No modern dev uses Latin B taxonomy for fuel injection logic. These names aren't just remnants. They're the load-bearing walls of the house. You can paint the walls, replace the windows, upgrade the furniture. But if you take out these beams, the entire house collapses. Dr. Thorne stared at the screen. Then she walked up to the laptop herself and started scrolling through the code, checking timestamps, tracing dependencies. Her face was unreadable, but her fingers moved with the speed of someone who actually understood what she was looking at. Finally, she turned to Preston. Mr. Vance, you told us this was a proprietary system built by a team of 20 developers over the last 5 years. That was your representation in the letter of intent. Preston stammered. We updated the interface. The dashboard is completely new. The dashboard is a skin. Dr. Thorne said coldly, cutting him off. "It's makeup on a pig. The engine is hers, and she holds the title. You tried to sell us a car you don't own." She closed her laptop with a decisive click that sounded like a gunshot in the quiet room. "We cannot proceed with this acquisition. The IP liability alone is catastrophic. If Ms. Vance shuts down the license, we're buying a fleet of very expensive paperweights. We can fix this." Conrad shouted from the corner, unable to contain himself any longer. "I can hire a team. We can rewrite it in a week. 2 weeks, tops." Dr. Thorne looked at Conrad with something between pity and contempt. "Young man, this is kernel-level architecture integrated into firmware across 500 vehicles and a dozen server clusters. It would take a team of 20 expert engineers at least a year to reverse engineer and rewrite this without breaking your existing contracts. You don't have a week. You don't have a month. You have nothing." She stood up and looked at me with professional respect. "Ms. Vance, I apologize for wasting your time. It seems we were severely misinformed about the nature of the assets in this deal." "No hard feelings," I said, shaking her hand again. As the Apex team packed up their things and walked out, Preston sat with his head in his hands. The $850 million deal had just evaporated like morning fog in the sun. I walked past my father on the way to the door. He didn't look up. He looked small now, diminished, like someone had let the air out of him. "You should have paid the $10 million, Dad," I whispered as I passed. "It would have been the bargain of the century. I thought the collapse of the Apex deal would be the end of it. I thought they'd retreat, lick their wounds, maybe, just maybe, come back to the table ready to negotiate like rational adults. I was wrong. When narcissists lose control, they don't negotiate. They don't reflect. They try to destroy the person who took control away from them." 2 days after the Apex meeting collapsed, I woke up to my phone absolutely exploding with notifications. Not calls, social media tags. Dozens of them. Hundreds. My mother had gone nuclear. She'd given an exclusive interview to the local news station and then posted a long, rambling sob story on her Facebook page, which had thousands of followers in the local community. The headline on the news clip read, "Elderly couple extorted by estranged daughter. Local business in peril." I watched the video in mounting horror. Beatrice was sitting in her living room on her favorite couch, dabbing her eyes with a lace handkerchief. Preston sat beside her holding her hand, looking frail and defeated, the picture of elderly victimhood. "We gave her everything," Beatrice sobbed on camera, her voice breaking beautifully. "We put her through school. We supported her when she couldn't find a husband, when she couldn't make friends. And now, in our twilight years, when we just want to retire peacefully, she's stolen our company's passwords and is holding us hostage for millions of dollars. She wants to bankrupt her own parents." The reporter, a young woman clearly looking for a viral story, added solemnly, "Logicor employs over 300 people in our community. Their jobs are now at risk because of this family dispute." The comments section was a cesspool, a toxic wasteland of judgment from strangers who knew nothing. What a monster. Ungrateful brat. She should be in jail. Elder abuse is real. I hope her parents sue her for everything. Someone should go to her house and teach her a lesson. That last one made my blood run cold. I felt sick. My hands were shaking as I scrolled through comment after comment, watching strangers condemn me based on a carefully edited lie. They were weaponizing the entire community against me. They were painting me as a hacker, a thief, a villain who was destroying hardworking people's livelihoods out of pure spite. My doorbell rang. I jumped like I'd been shocked. I looked at the security monitor. It wasn't family. It wasn't police. It was a reporter with a microphone, and behind him was a news van with a satellite dish. "Ms. Vance, do you have a comment on your parents' allegations?" the reporter shouted at my door. I closed the blinds. I felt trapped in my own home, under siege, drowning in a narrative I couldn't control. My phone rang. It was Victor. Don't look at the internet, he said immediately. Too late, I said, my voice cracking. Victor, they're lying. They're saying I stole passwords. They're saying I'm extorting them. The whole town thinks I'm a criminal. I know, Victor said, and his voice had changed. It was hard now, dangerous, the voice of a predator who just spotted prey. And they just made the biggest mistake of their miserable lives. How? Everyone hates me. Valerie, listen to me very carefully. They just went on public record accusing you of specific crimes, extortion and theft, that we have already proven in a legal deposition you did not commit. That is defamation, Peresi. That is malice aforethought. That is a lawsuit we can win in our sleep. I don't care about lawsuits right now, Victor. There are people outside my house. Let them stand there, Victor said coldly. Because when we file this defamation suit, we're not just going after the company assets. We're going after their personal assets. The house, the cars, the retirement accounts, the trust fund, everything. We're going to take everything they have and leave them with nothing but the truth. I just want it to stop, I whispered. It will stop, Victor promised. But we have to hit back harder. I need you to authorize me to release the full 2011 agreement and the audio recording of the board meeting where Preston called you the help. We need to control the narrative. We need the truth out there. I hesitated. Releasing the audio meant exposing the private rot of my family to the entire world. It meant there would be no reconciliation, no path back, no Christmas dinners 20 years from now where we all pretended this never happened. It meant burning every bridge and salting the earth. I looked at the window where reporters were camped out on my lawn. I thought about my bees, about how a colony protects itself by eliminating threats without hesitation or sentiment. And I thought about my mother's perfectly performed tears on that screen. Do it, I said. Burn it all down. Good girl, Victor said. Watch the news at 6. 3 months later, I stood in the bankruptcy liquidation office, watching my family's empire get dismantled piece by piece like a car in a chop shop. The Vanguard Systems CEO, a sharp woman named Eleanor, slid a document across the metal table toward me. Ms. Vance, we've reviewed your patent portfolio extensively. It's elegant, superior to our current system in every measurable way. Vanguard is prepared to offer you a direct purchase of the IP rights, independent of the logic or assets. She named a number, $120 million, plus a 5% royalty on all future software licensing revenue. It wasn't the $850 million Apex had offered for the whole company, but this was just for the code, just for my work, and it was all mine. I accept, I said, signing the paper. Victor, sitting beside me, grinned like a wolf. Preston looked up from across the table, his eyes watery and defeated. $12 million, he whispered, staring at the offer Vanguard had made for the physical assets, the trucks, the warehouses, the real estate. The buildings alone are worth 50. The buildings are leveraged to the hilt, Eleanor said without emotion. And you have $40 million in outstanding lawsuits from clients who lost cargo when your system failed. $12 million allows you to pay off the bank and avoid prison for criminal negligence. You walk away with nothing, but you walk away free. Preston looked at me with something that might have been fear or might have been recognition, the dawning realization that he'd created this. Valerie, he rasped, help us, please. You just made $100 million. Pay the debt. Save the family name. I looked at Beatrice. She was finally looking at me, her eyes pleading, the same woman who'd gone on television and called me a monster. The family name? I asked quietly. You mean the name you tried to give exclusively to Conrad? The name you kicked me out of? I stood up and smoothed my blazer. I'm not buying your debt, Dad. I'm not saving the company. I'm moving on. Vanguard offered me the position of Senior Vice President of Innovation. I have a team to lead. I have work to do. Real work. I turned to Eleanor. The deal looks good. Let's close. Preston put his head on the table and sobbed, a guttural, ugly sound that might have broken my heart if I still had one to break for him. Beatrice watched me with calculation in her eyes, already wondering how long she'd have to wait before asking me for a loan. "One more thing," I said, pausing at the door. The grandfather clock in the lobby of the old headquarters. It belonged to my actual grandfather. I want it. "Take it," Preston whispered into the table. "Take everything." "I will," I said. 6 months after that, I stood in my new office on the 42nd floor of the Vanguard Systems building, all glass and steel, overlooking the city skyline. On the wall behind my desk hung the restored grandfather clock, ticking with steady, perfect rhythm. My title was Senior Vice President of Innovation Strategy. I led a team of 50 engineers, young, brilliant people who actually listened when I spoke, who asked questions, who valued expertise over ego. When I walked into meetings, the room went quiet, not out of fear, out of respect. I checked my phone. A notification from my home security camera showed my backyard. 20 white boxes now, my expanded apiary producing enough honey to sell at the farmer's market every weekend. The bees were thriving. The colony was strong. There's a rule in beekeeping. If a queen is weak, if she endangers the colony, the workers will eliminate her and raise a new queen. It's not cruelty. It's survival. I'd eliminated the weak queen. I'd saved the colony. And for the first time in 48 years, the hive was thriving. I saw my father at a restaurant last week. He was sitting alone in a booth, looking frail and small. When he noticed me, he tried to wave, that familiar gesture of authority that used to make me jump. I didn't wave back. I didn't acknowledge him at all. I just finished my meal, left a generous tip for the waitress, and walked out into the sunshine. Am I wrong for that? Did I go too far? Or did they get exactly what they deserved? Drop your honest answer in the comments. I want to hear both sides. And if this story hit home, if you saw yourself in any part of this journey, do me a favor, share it. Share it with someone who needs to hear that it's okay to choose yourself, that boundaries aren't betrayal, that sometimes the only way to save yourself is to let the people who hurt you face the consequences of their own actions. Hit that subscribe button and click the video in the description. It's about a woman who discovered her husband had been stealing her inheritance for years. Because sometimes the people closest to us are the ones who betray us deepest. Thanks for being here. Thanks for listening. And remember, you don't owe loyalty to people who never valued you in the first place.